A lot of people think of oil as Russia's superpower, the fuel that made the country big, rich, and feared. But here's the strange part. In an oil country, people still line up at gas stations. And when the global price dips, prices in Russia go up anyway. So, what's really going on? Is Russia still an oil superpower or something else entirely? I'm Elvira Bary. I was born in the Soviet Union, and I've watched Russian rulers repeat the same bargain for decades. When easy money arrives, they don't modernize. They don't build institutions. They don't invest in competition, courts, or accountability. They buy obedience from bureaucrats, loyalty from the people with guns, and an illusion of national strength. Oil money is the perfect wealth for an authoritarian system. It lets you extract value from the ground with minimal oversight and spend the profits like private money on prestige, on luxury, on friends, on force, on the toy soldiers, tanks, rockets, parades, and on the kind of loyal men who solve problems when you decide someone needs to be punished. As long as everyone gets their cut, the machine runs. But it only works under very specific conditions. Extraction has to be steady, logistics have to be safe, and the price has to stay kind. And now that machine is starting to shake. Prices soften, the bills keep coming, and the whole system makes that ominous sound, like a washing machine right before it breaks. Today, we are going to look at what's really left of Russia's oil power, what's breaking, what's being patched with duct tape, and why Putin can't afford this war the way he pretends he can. Here's our roadmap. The lucky decade, how high oil prices made Russia feel unstoppable. China changes shape, why the world's biggest oil customer is learning to need less. The less oil machine, the problems stacking up inside Russia's oil industry. Refineries under fire, how Ukraine is disrupting Russia's fuel chain. Shadow roads, why Russia's export loopholes are nearly their limit. If you enjoy deep dives like this, like the video and subscribe. And one more thing, if you want to follow my work beyond YouTube, including behind the scenes research for my upcoming novel, The Snow Queen Spring, early experts, and personal notes, subscribe to my newsletter to join me on Facebook and Instagram. All the links are under the video. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, you can join the think tank or use super thanks right below. The lucky decade. At the start, Putin's system wanted one thing: money without accountability. Not the kind of money you earn by building new industries. That kind of wealth comes with headaches. If you want to compete, you need educated people. To keep them, you have to pay them well and offer safety and stability. And once educated people have money and stability, they start thinking about politics, freedoms, and justice. Sooner or later, someone asks the forbidden question: by what right does the unremovable man at the very top take the nation's wealth and spend it like his personal wallet? No warlord wants that problem. So the smarter model is extraction. Put the industry far from political and financial centers, lay down a web of pipelines, sell oil and gas abroad, and let naive foreign buyers wire money straight into your coffers, with no courts, no scrutiny, and no accountability. In 2000, Brent crude averaged around $28 a barrel. By 2008, it averaged close to $97. The price crashed in the financial crisis, then came back. From 2011 through 2014, the yearly average stayed above $100. For Russia, this pricing was oxygen. When oil was expensive, the state could take a big cut and still leave everyone else breathing. Once this money started flowing, the regime built a bargain. The security services got fat budgets. Big state companies got access and protection. Pensioners got their payments on time. In the large cities, people could live a normal life as long as they didn't touch politics. Oil money kept the country running and getting wealthier without any need to modernize. In January 2005, Russia repaired its remaining IMF debt early, about $3 billion, and stopped being one of the fund's biggest debtors. In the late 1990s, Russia's international reserves were about $12 billion. By August 2008, before the global crisis hit, they reached almost $600 billion. That's how much money the state was able to stash away for a rainy day. But profiting from an oil boom isn't a plan. It's sheer luck. And while that lucky stroke lasted, Putin didn't build a system that could weather a long period of bad prices. Now, we move to the external engine that helped keep those prices high for so long: China. And China is not the same country anymore. China changes shape. For 3 decades, China's leadership wanted fast economic growth as a way to keep the society quiet. It was an agreement it made with the population: work long hours, accept censorship, and the state will deliver rising living standards. For a long time, the fuel was cheap labor and endless construction. Factories ran, ports expanded, cities climbed upward one tower after another. That machine pulled in huge amounts of energy, including oil. This is how Russia got lucky. China's boom lifted the price of everything that powers industry. But today, China is changing. Not because it suddenly became democratic or gentle, because it is running into limits. Start with people. China's working age population is no longer a growing army. It has been rising for decades, but in recent years it's flattened and turned down. The era of cheap labor is over. As employers have to compete for workers and raise wages, growth will low down. Then there is the property market oversaturation. Since mid-2021, China's housing and developer crisis has dragged on. Developers can't sell all the apartments they build. There are entire ghost towns of brand new high-rises waiting for their first residents who aren't coming. And the real estate stress spills over to the rest of the economy. When apartments stop being a safe bet, households spend less. When local governments sell less land, they invest less. That is a direct hit to China's build model that used to power its growth. As China's industrial machine slows down and needs less oil, the global prices slump. Between 2013 and 2023, China was responsible for more than 60% of the global increase in overall oil demand, but in 2024, it represented less than 20% of the increase. For Russia, that shift is an existential threat. Putin's system was built during the era when China's demand kept pulling and prices stayed comfortably high. And the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022 at the perfect moment for the Kremlin. Oil was already expensive because of the post-pandemic rebound and a tight global market. That timing mattered. The plan was to win fast, then use high oil prices to cushion the blow from sanctions. But the war didn't end fast. It's now heading into its 5th year. And along the way, A problem emerged that Moscow's top brass didn't expect. Oil prices started falling, but even the recent favorable prices couldn't fix one thing. Russia's oil supply is gradually becoming scarce. The less oiled machine. On paper, Russia has plenty of oil. The problem is not with the oil and tomorrow. The problem is how much effort, money, and imported brain power does each new barrel require. Most of Russia's core production still comes from mature provinces, especially in western Siberia, and mature oil is never easy to surface. Pressure falls, water rises, you drill more wells to get the same result. Samotlor is a good example. It's one of the giant Soviet-era fields. Today, it's water flooded. That means hauling and separating huge volumes of water just to get a thinner film of oil. This is where technology becomes the difference between a field that declines slowly and a field that collapses fast. To keep output stable, you need pumps, compressors, downhole tools, seismic software, and constant workovers. You need a whole ecosystem that the Soviet state never fully built, and the post-Soviet state didn't prioritize. Russia can try to compensate by moving into tougher territory, but the next layers are not the same as the old Soviet giants. Maintaining output into the 2030s pushes Russia toward higher cost and technically challenging areas, including Arctic offshore projects and the Bazhenov tight oil formation in western Siberia. Now add sanctions and corporate exits. Baker Hughes exited Russian operation in 2022, selling its Russian oilfield service business. Halliburton also sold its Russian business, and SLB, the oilfield service giant formerly known as Schlumberger, stayed, but under heavy scrutiny and with limits on new investment and shipments. That leaves Russia with a partial substitute, local successors, local sourcing, and a lot of improvisation. And that's why Russia doesn't actually choose how much oil it sells the way people imagine. It sells whatever it can physically pull out and move. If the wells decline or the equipment chain breaks, no decree fixes that. Refineries under fire. In the recent months, Ukrainian armed forces have increasingly targeted Russian refineries. The goal is not to stop every barrel, but rather to jam the system, making it slower and more expensive. By December 11, Ukrainian drones struck at least 17 major refineries. That's not even remotely enough to create a national fuel collapse. For that, you'd need to knock out half of Russia's total refining capacity, and many facilities are located in the Far East, beyond the reach of Ukrainian drones. But still, between 15 and 20% of refineries in the European part of Russia stopped for unplanned repairs after the attacks. And that creates friction. You hit a refinery or a depot, and suddenly the region has to drag fuel in from somewhere else. And that's where the real pain sits. Logistics. Rail schedules, storage, routing. A refinery can be offline and the country still pumps crude. But people don't drive on crude. They drive on a supply chain that's easy to jam and hard to restart quickly, especially when parts and skilled crews are stretched. The consequences already show up in the daily life of many Russians. On September 29th, Russian-controlled Crimea froze fuel prices for 30 days and imposed rationing. Drivers could buy only up to 30 liters at a time. Governor Sergei Aksyonov publicly urged residents not to hoard gasoline. The next day, Russia extended its gasoline export ban and announced a partial diesel export ban until year-end. That means less cash from exports. Moscow even pays refineries so they keep selling at home. This is known as the damper mechanism. When export markets are more profitable, the state uses budget transfers to make domestic sales tolerable for companies. But here's a catch. Mikhail Krutikhin, a Russian oil industry expert, estimates that 75% of domestic gasoline price in Russia comes from taxes and fees. If the state truly wanted cheap gasoline for the population, it could cut that tax load. It doesn't. Instead, it keeps the tax take high, then invents complicated compensation schemes so refineries keep selling domestically even when exports would be more profitable. And those compensations aren't free money. They are paid from the federal budget, which means it's still the ordinary people shouldering the cost, just with extra steps. Shadow routes. When you bring up international sanctions and their effect on Russian oil export, you can often hear this lazy phrase, Russia adapted. We don't care about sanctions. That's a way to point out that oil still moves, tankers still sail, money still comes in, but the real question is not does oil flow? The real question is at what price, through what risks, and with how much money left on the table. The price cap system hits Russia in a very specific place, at the services, insurance, financing, and brokering. The things you need if you want to sell oil. In July, the EU lowered the crude oil price cap from $60 to $47.60 and built a mechanism to keep the cap below the average Urals price. That means Russia can sell, but it can use Western services when selling above the cap. Now look at what happens next. On November 27, the Russian central bank said the Urals discount to Brent widened to 23%. That's a market tax for being toxic. If your cargo brings legal, insurance, and reputational risk, buyers always demand a discount. So Russia does what any sanctioned exporter does. It builds a parallel system. That's the shadow fleet. All ships that keep changing flags. Gray zone middlemen. Secret transfers at sea. Insurance that exists on paper and disappears when the hull cracks. I have a video that looks into Russia's shadow fleet operations in detail. Europe keeps cracking down on that fleet. On December 18th, the EU targeted 41 more vessels, bringing the total close to 600. All the ships are banned from entering major ports and receiving maritime services. The United States is doing its own version. On January 10, the US Treasury announced sanctions that included an unprecedented number of oil-carrying vessels tied to Russia's evasive network. But here's a new part. Ukraine is starting to treat the shadow fleet as a legitimate target. On December 19, Ukraine struck a shadow fleet tanker in the Mediterranean for the first time. The vessel, Candil, was empty. It suffered critical damage in neutral waters, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. That detail matters. If you are a ship owner, you now price in more than sanctions. You price in drones. If you are a buyer, you price in delays and uncertainty. And if you are Moscow, you are still exporting. But each barrel comes with more hidden costs. So yes, Russia adapted, but adapting means selling cheaper, paying more to move the oil, and making bigger risks to keep the cash coming. When oil rent shrinks. There's an old Russian joke about what happens when money gets tight. A father rants about yet another price hike. His little son asks, "Does it mean you'll have to cut down on your vodka?" "No, sorry," the father says. "That means you'll have to cut down on your food. Putin's state follows the same logic. When it runs out of money, it doesn't reduce its ambitions. Instead, it squeezes the population. Russia's oil and gas revenues are already at a low point. They're expected to fall by about 35% year on year in November, driven by cheaper oil and stronger ruble. The oil production tax proceeds could drop to 380 billion rubles, the lowest in 3 years, and down 55% year on year. So, what does the state do? First, it changes taxes in ways that look reasonable on TV. Last year, the Finance Ministry proposed higher personal income tax rates for higher earners, with brackets rising up to 22% for the top tier. This September, Putin publicly greenlit tax hikes as a means to close the budget gap while also reducing dependency on oil revenue. That phrase sounds like common sense, but it doesn't imply modernization or investing into non-oil industries. The tactic is to squeeze taxpayers for more money to make up for declining export revenues. Second, the state targets consumption and daily life. There's a plan to increase excise taxes on petroleum products in 2025-2027, and that in turn will make all consumer products that are transported by vehicles a little more expensive. Third, the government plays the shell game inside the oil sector itself, trying to keep domestic fuel stable without admitting scarcity. On November 28, Putin signed a law allowing a reserve excise tax on oil refined abroad under tolling arrangements. Deputy Finance Minister Alexei Sazanov said Russian oil is refined in Belarus under a similar scheme, with gasoline owned by Russian firms and mostly supplied back to the domestic market. Just pause on that image. A country that sells crude to the world is rewriting tax codes so it can claim credits for refining abroad because it needs to keep its own gas stations supplied without letting prices explode. That's where Russia ended up, as each barrel of oil it sells gradually got heavier. More discounts, more logistic costs, more risk, more duct tape. Now oil buys less. And the state's instinct is to fill the gap with new taxes and pressure that people feel in daily life, even if they never open a budget spreadsheet. That's why the key question for the next year is not, will Russia run out of oil? The question is, how much more can the state keep patching the gaps before it collapses? If you want more grounded breakdowns like this, how systems actually work, not how they are advertised, subscribe and hit like so YouTube shows you next one. And if you want to go deeper with me beyond YouTube, I'd love to have you in my newsletter. I share behind-the-scenes research for my upcoming novel, The Snow Queen Spring, early excerpts, and the real historical discoveries that shape the story. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram. Links are under the video. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, you can join the think tank or leave a super thanks right below. It truly helps me keep doing this work. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. What do you expect to happen if global oil prices keep falling? How do you think that will reshape geopolitics? And will it affect your own life in any direct way? Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.